She always walked quietly through the school corridor, keeping her head down so no one would notice her. Her shoes were old, the color faded from years of use, and her backpack was held together by tape on one side. Most days she looked invisible, but not invisible enough to escape the laughter. Some students laughed when she dropped her books. Others whispered behind her back when she sat alone in the cafeteria. She wasn't the kind of girl people invited to sit with them. She didn't wear stylish clothes or talk about movies or parties. She didn't even have a phone like most of them did. What she had was a small notebook full of scribbles, random words, pieces of music notes, and sometimes small sketches of a piano. No one knew why she loved that instrument so much. She never took music lessons. She didn't come from a rich family. Her mother worked long hours at a small store, and her father had left years ago. Life was simple and quiet, and the only sound that filled her little house was the soft hum she made when she studied or daydreamed. Every day, after classes ended, she would walk past the school auditorium. Inside that room stood an old piano, scratched, dusty, and missing a few keys. Most students didn't care for it anymore, but every time she passed by, she slowed down, listening to the faint echo of something she imagined, a melody she had never learned, but somehow knew in her heart. One afternoon, when the hallway was empty and the janitor was sweeping the floor, she stopped and asked softly, "Can I sit there for a bit?" The old man looked up, surprised. Hardly anyone talked to him, but her voice had something honest in it. He smiled and nodded. "As long as you don't break it," he said jokingly. She smiled back, maybe for the first time that week, and walked up to the piano. Her hands hovered above the keys for a moment, unsure. Then she pressed one note. It sounded old and tired, but it made her heart jump. She pressed another, and another. Each sound was like a piece of something lost being found again. From that day, she came back every evening. The janitor would sweep quietly nearby, pretending not to notice, though sometimes he'd pause to listen. The girl didn't know much about music theory or reading notes. She only knew how the keys felt, how each one seemed to speak a language her heart understood better than words. At first, the sounds she made were broken, off tune, clumsy, uncertain. But she kept trying. Her fingers stumbled, her timing was off, and she would often sigh in frustration. Still, she came back every day. The janitor started leaving the light on for her, knowing she'd be there again. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, her sounds started to turn into music. She learned by listening to old recordings online when she could use the school computer. She'd replay the same song dozens of times until she could remember it by heart. Then late in the evening, she would try to bring that same song to life on the old piano. Her fingertips became rough from pressing the keys for hours, but she didn't care. At school, nothing changed. The other students still laughed. One day, a group of them walked into the auditorium while she was practicing. She froze, her heart pounding. "What are you doing?" one of them asked, smirking. "Trying to be famous or something?" They laughed as she stood there, silent, her fingers trembling. One girl even said, "You don't even know what you're doing. Just stop embarrassing yourself." The laughter echoed long after they left. That night, she didn't go back to the piano. She sat on her bed, staring at her notebook full of notes and scribbles. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was foolish to think she could ever play like the great pianists she admired. But as the night went on, something inside her refused to give up. She remembered how the sound of the piano made her feel, alive, free, understood. That feeling was too precious to lose. The next day she returned. The janitor smiled when he saw her come in. "You're not giving up, huh?" he said. She shook her head softly. "No, not yet." That evening she played with more emotion than before. Her notes weren't perfect, but they carried something deeper, something that came from all the laughter, all the loneliness, all the small pieces of hope she refused to let go of. She didn't need sheet music to tell her what to play. Her heart was the sheet. Her pain was the rhythm. The janitor, standing in the back, could feel something shift in her music. It wasn't just practice anymore. It was a story. Days passed and she grew bolder. She started to come earlier, sometimes even skipping lunch just to spend more time with the piano. The sound filled the empty auditorium, echoing through the halls. Once, a teacher walking by stopped for a moment, listening. "Who's playing?" she asked the janitor later. He only smiled and said, "Just someone who believes in sound more than silence." Still, no one really noticed her outside that room. At lunch, she sat alone as always, listening to others talk about things she couldn't join in. But she didn't feel as sad anymore. She carried music inside her now, like a small secret flame that no one could take away. One Friday, the principal made an announcement about the upcoming school music competition. It was open to everyone. The auditorium filled with chatter as students started talking about who would perform. The talented ones, the trained ones, were already planning their pieces. When she quietly went to the sign-up sheet and wrote her name, a few students burst out laughing. You're going to play?" one said with disbelief. "Do you even know what a real song sounds like?" She didn't answer. She just smiled faintly, knowing they wouldn't understand. The janitor saw the commotion and shook his head. After everyone left, he walked up to her and said, "You sure about this?" She nodded. "I have to try." From that day on, her practice became more intense. She stayed late, sometimes until the janitor had to gently remind her it was closing time. Her fingers moved faster now, her ears sharper. She could sense when a note was wrong, when her rhythm slipped, and she fixed it on her own. The piano had become her friend, the only one that never judged or laughed. At home, she would hum the same melodies while helping her mother with chores. Her mother, exhausted after long shifts, would sometimes ask, "What's that tune you keep humming?" The girl would smile softly and say, "Just something I'm learning." She didn't tell her about the competition. She wanted it to be a surprise. The night before the event, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, her heart beating fast. Fear crept in. Fear of being laughed at again, of freezing on stage, of failing. But then she remembered how the music had always saved her before. How every time she felt small, the piano made her feel infinite. That thought gave her courage. The next morning, the sun was bright and the air buzzed with excitement. Students carried their instruments, some tuning guitars, others adjusting violins. She walked in quietly, holding nothing but her small notebook. When her turn came, a few students in the back snickered. "This will be funny," one whispered. She walked to the piano, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it. She sat down, closed her eyes, and took a slow breath. For a moment, everything went silent. The laughter, the whispers, the world. Then she placed her hands on the keys and pressed the first note. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. As the sound filled the hall, even the janitor paused at the doorway, his broom still in hand. He knew that something special was beginning, something no one in that room would ever forget, because the girl they laughed at was about to show them what music made of truth and pain really sounded like. After the small school competition, something inside her changed. She didn't win any prize that day. Her performance wasn't perfect and a few wrong notes had slipped through. But the moment she finished, she felt a strange calm inside, like she had finally spoken her heart in a language no one could interrupt. When the audience clapped politely, she looked up and saw a few surprised faces. Even some of the students who had laughed before were quiet for a moment, as if they weren't sure how to react. For her, that small silence was enough. It meant they had listened. Even for a few seconds, they had really listened. That night, she walked home under the streetlights, holding her old notebook close to her chest. The air felt different. For once, she didn't feel invisible. The next few weeks, she kept coming back to the piano. The janitor would often find her already sitting there when he unlocked the doors. Sometimes she played softly, lost in thought. Other times, she played with energy, her fingers dancing over the keys as if they had a life of their own. He noticed how quickly she was improving, how her music had started to sound more alive, full of feeling and control. One evening, as the sound echoed through the hall, he walked closer and said gently, "You're getting good." She smiled without looking up. "Not yet," she said. "But I want to be," he nodded. "That's what makes the difference," he said. The wanting. Her practice became her whole world. After school, she would rush to the auditorium. She spent hours listening to recordings of famous pianists on an old pair of borrowed earphones, replaying the same sections over and over. She tried to figure out how they made their sound flow so smoothly, how they made emotion pour out through just their fingertips. But more than technique, she was drawn to the feeling behind it. She didn't want to copy anyone. She wanted to play the way she felt, to let her heart shape the sound. That became her quiet goal. Outside the music room, nothing much changed. The same students still talked and laughed. The same whispers floated around. But now those things didn't reach her as deeply as before. The piano had become her world, a place where laughter couldn't touch her. One afternoon, she sat on the old wooden bench staring at the piano. The sun coming through the high windows cast golden light on the keys. Her hands hovered above them, unsure where to start. She closed her eyes and thought of her mother, who worked every day just to keep their home running. She thought of how tired her mother's face looked every night, but how she still managed to smile. And suddenly the notes began to flow. They weren't from a song she knew. They came from her heart, like a story she had been holding back for too long. The melody was soft and sad at first. Then it grew stronger, carrying everything she couldn't say in words. It was as if the piano was speaking for her, telling the world what it meant to keep going even when everything felt heavy. When she opened her eyes, the janitor was standing nearby, completely still. He didn't speak for a while, then he said quietly, "That one sounded like it came from your soul." She looked down shyly, unsure how to respond. "It just came to me," she said softly. He smiled. "That's when it's real." Word started to spread in small ways. A few teachers had begun noticing the music that filled the halls in the evenings. Sometimes a curious student would peek through the door, expecting to see one of the music club kids, only to find her, the same quiet girl everyone used to ignore. It confused them. How could someone with no lessons play like that? Still, not everyone was kind. One afternoon, when she was walking back from the library, a group of students stopped her. One of them said mockingly, "Heard you think you're some kind of piano star now." She stayed quiet. "You should just stop pretending," another said. "People are only talking about you because it's funny." They laughed and walked away, leaving her standing there, clutching her books tightly against her chest. That night, she didn't go to the piano. She sat on her bed, staring at her notebook again. It had pages full of song ideas, small fragments she'd written after practice. But for the first time in weeks, she felt doubt creeping back. Maybe she was still that same girl they laughed at. Maybe no matter how hard she tried, they'd never take her seriously. The next evening, when she walked home from school, she passed by the auditorium. The lights were off, but she could see the faint outline of the piano through the window. Something in her heart pulled her inside. She turned the handle and walked in. The air was cold and quiet. She sat at the bench and rested her hands on the keys. Then she remembered what the janitor had said. "That's when it's real." She pressed one note, then another. Slowly the music returned, shaky at first, then steady. She poured all her hurt, her loneliness, and her quiet strength into the sound. The music became her comfort again. After that night, her practice grew deeper. It wasn't just about learning anymore. It was about feeling. Every note she played came from a place inside her that she hadn't even known existed before. She began writing her own little pieces, melodies that came to her while walking home or during class when she daydreamed. She would scribble them down on scraps of paper, then bring them to life on the piano later. The janitor sometimes found those papers left behind and would quietly pick them up, smoothing out the wrinkles. He started keeping them safe in a small folder, knowing one day they might mean something. A few months later, the principal announced that the school would be hosting a community event, an evening performance where students could showcase their talents in front of parents, teachers, and guests from the town. The girl felt her heart race when she heard about it. She had never performed in front of a large crowd, but something inside her whispered, "Maybe this is your time." When she went to sign up, a few students rolled their eyes. One said, "Oh no, not her again. We already heard enough of her sad songs." She didn't reply. She simply wrote her name and walked away. The janitor saw her that afternoon and said, "You're doing it, aren't you?" She nodded nervously. "I'm scared," she admitted. He smiled. Everyone is scared before they do something that matters. In the weeks leading up to the event, she practiced more than ever. Sometimes she forgot to eat. Sometimes she stayed until the janitor had to gently turn off the lights. Her music grew powerful and full of heart, sorrow, and hope. It was as if she wasn't just playing anymore. She was speaking through sound. At home, she finally told her mother about the performance. Her mother's eyes filled with pride. "You've worked so hard," she said softly. "No matter what happens, I'll be there." Those words gave her courage. The night of the performance arrived. The auditorium looked different, decorated with lights and banners, the seats filled with parents and guests. The air buzzed with excitement. Students performed one after another, songs, dances, poems. The audience clapped politely after each. When her turn came, she walked to the piano slowly, feeling every eye on her. She could hear whispers from the back, the same laughter that had followed her for years. Her hands trembled slightly as she sat down. For a moment she wanted to run away, but then she saw her mother sitting near the front, smiling softly, and the janitor standing near the door. Giving her a small nod, she took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. The sound that came out was gentle at first, almost fragile. Then it grew, spreading through the room like a wave of feeling. Every note carried a piece of her story. The laughter she endured, the nights she practiced alone, the dreams she never gave up on. Her music filled the air with something pure, something that made people forget where they were. By the time she played the final note, the entire room was silent. No one laughed. No one whispered. They simply sat there watching her in awe. She opened her eyes, and for the first time she didn't see doubt on their faces. She saw respect. She saw wonder, and deep down she knew this was only the beginning. The day after the performance, the school was buzzing with talk. Everyone had something to say about the quiet girl who had played the piano. Some said they couldn't believe it was her. Others said they had never heard music like that in their lives. For the first time, her name was being spoken not as a joke but with a kind of awe. When she walked through the hallways that morning, no one laughed. A few students even smiled at her, though awkwardly. She didn't quite know what to do. She smiled back, unsure if it was real or just politeness. But it didn't matter much. She had felt something powerful that night, something that went beyond people's opinions. Her mother hugged her when she came home after the show. "You made everyone listen," she said softly. The girl didn't reply. She simply leaned into the hug, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Still, she didn't let it get to her head. The next afternoon, she was back at the piano just like always. The janitor wasn't surprised when he saw her there again. He chuckled and said, "Didn't even take a break, huh?" She smiled shyly. "If I stop now, I'll forget how it feels." And so her routine continued. But something was different this time. When she played, it wasn't just for herself anymore. She began to think of what her music could mean to others, how it might comfort, move, or inspire someone the way it had comforted her. That thought gave her new energy. One afternoon, a teacher from the music department visited the auditorium. She had heard about the performance and wanted to meet the girl. She listened quietly as the girl played one of her own small pieces, a song she had written after a long, rainy night. The melody was calm but full of emotion, almost like a conversation between sadness and hope. When the girl finished, the teacher said softly, "You have something rare. You play with feeling, not just skill. Have you ever thought about learning properly?" The girl hesitated. "I can't afford lessons," she said quietly. The teacher thought for a moment, then smiled. "I'll help you. If you're willing to learn, I'll teach you here after school." It felt unreal. Someone believed in her. Not because they pitied her, but because they saw potential in her. She agreed immediately. From that day on, her evenings were split between practice and learning. The teacher showed her how to read sheet music properly, how to understand rhythm, how to control her touch on the keys. At first, it was overwhelming. The technical side of music was harder than she expected. But she never gave up. She took notes carefully, practiced each exercise again and again until it felt natural. Within weeks, her playing started to sound cleaner, more confident. The teacher often smiled and said, "You learn fast. Most students take months to get this far." The girl would blush and reply, "I just really love it." Word of her progress began to spread beyond the school. One day, a local newspaper reporter came to visit after hearing about the self-taught school pianist. The girl was nervous at first, but the reporter's questions were kind. "What makes you keep going?" he asked. She thought for a moment and said, "Music listens when no one else does." The answer made the reporter pause, and later those words appeared in the article's headline. After the article was published, a few people from the town began showing up at her school events. Some offered to help, others just wanted to hear her play. It was strange for her to be noticed after spending so long being ignored. But she remained humble. She still wore the same old shoes, still carried her worn-out notebook full of music ideas. Nothing about her life had really changed except the way people looked at her. Not everyone liked the attention she was getting. A few students who used to be known for their talents felt jealous. One of them said loudly in the hallway one day, "She's only famous because she's poor. Everyone feels sorry for her." The words stung, but she didn't respond. Deep down, she knew that their jealousy came from not understanding what she had gone through. The teacher noticed her sadness that week. "Don't let small minds dim your music," she said gently. "The ones who laugh don't know the cost of passion." The girl nodded slowly. She knew she had to stay focused. Over the next few months, she practiced harder than ever. Her teacher began training her for a regional competition, a real one this time, where schools from across the district would participate. It felt intimidating. There would be judges, professional pianists, and hundreds of people watching. But she didn't back down. She saw it as a chance to grow, to push herself beyond her fears. Every evening, the auditorium echoed with her music. The janitor often sat quietly in the back, listening. Sometimes her teacher would join too, clapping softly after she finished each run. The girl began to realize something. Her music wasn't just sounds anymore. It had become a part of other people's lives. One night when she stayed late, the janitor told her something he had never shared before. "You know," he said quietly, "my wife used to play the piano too. Before she passed, this was her favorite place." The girl looked at him surprised. He smiled sadly. "When I hear you play, it's like she's still here. So thank you for that." Her eyes softened. "Then I'll keep playing," she said gently. "For her too." The day of the regional competition came faster than she expected. Her teacher helped her pick a piece that would show not just skill but emotion, something powerful and true. She decided to play a song she had written herself, one inspired by her own journey. When she arrived at the grand auditorium, her heart raced. It was much larger than her school's. The stage lights looked blinding, and the polished piano gleamed like something from another world. All around her were students in neat uniforms, their families cheering them on. She stood quietly in a corner, clutching her small music book. Her teacher touched her shoulder and whispered, "You belong here. Don't forget that." When her turn came, she walked onto the stage slowly, feeling her knees tremble. The audience quieted. The judges sat with pens in hand. For a moment, she thought about all the times she had been laughed at, all the nights she had practiced alone, all the times she had wanted to quit but didn't. Then she took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. The first note rang out soft and clear. Then another. Slowly, the melody began to unfold, gentle, emotional, full of honesty. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Every sound carried something personal, the memory of pain, the strength of hope. As she played, her fear melted away. It was just her and the piano now. She didn't see the judges or the crowd. She saw her mother working late, the janitor sweeping floors, her teacher smiling, her old self sitting alone by the piano for the first time. All of them were inside her music. When the final note faded, the silence in the hall was deep and full. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then the applause began, soft at first, then stronger until the whole room was standing. She looked up, eyes wide, not believing what she saw. Her teacher had tears in her eyes. Even the judges were smiling. She didn't win first place that day. She came second. But it didn't matter. When they announced her name, the entire room clapped louder than they had for anyone else. And when she walked off the stage, her teacher whispered, "You played like you had 1,000 souls inside you." That night, as she walked home under the stars, she felt lighter than ever before. She thought about everything that had happened, the laughter, the long nights, the struggle, and how it had all led her to this moment. She knew there was still a long way to go. But now she wasn't the girl they laughed at anymore. She was the girl who played, and the world had finally started to listen. After the regional competition, everything seemed to change for her, even though she still lived the same simple life. People in her town started recognizing her. Sometimes strangers would stop her on the street just to say they had read about her or seen her play. It felt strange to be noticed. For so long she had walked through life unseen, unheard, and now people wanted to listen. But she didn't let it go to her head. She still helped her mother with chores, still walked to school the same way, still practiced on the old piano that had been there since before she was born. It was never about fame for her. It was always about the sound, the feeling that came when her fingers touched the keys and everything else disappeared. One day, Her music teacher told her that a music foundation from the city had heard her performance. They wanted to invite her for an audition. "It's not just a small show," the teacher said. "If they like you, they'll give you a scholarship to study music professionally." The words hit her like a wave. A scholarship. A real chance. Something she had never dared to dream about. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Then quietly she asked, "Do you think I'm ready?" The teacher smiled and replied, "You've been ready since the day you stopped caring what others thought." For the next few weeks, she practiced harder than ever before. Every note mattered. Every sound carried her dream. Sometimes she stayed at school so late that the janitor had to remind her to go home. "Don't wear yourself out," he would say kindly. She would just smile and whisper, "I can rest later." Her mother watched her from a distance, proud but worried. "Don't forget to eat," she would say softly at night. The girl would nod, but her mind was always somewhere else, inside the music she was creating. The day of the audition arrived. It was held in a big city far from her town. Her teacher arranged for her to travel with a small group of students, but she was the only one who didn't have formal training. As the bus moved along the road, she looked out the window, watching the trees pass by, trying to calm her nerves. The thought of playing in front of real professionals made her hands shake. When they reached the city, she could hardly believe how large everything was. The buildings were tall, the streets were crowded, and the air smelled different. The audition hall was beautiful. Polished floors, tall windows, and a grand piano that shone under the lights. She had never seen anything so perfect. As she waited for her turn, she watched others play. Some were confident and sharp, their music full of technique and speed. They looked like they belonged there. When her name was called, she took a deep breath and walked up slowly, feeling her legs tremble. She sat down, placed her hands on the piano, and closed her eyes. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then she began to play. Her music started soft, like a whisper. It carried the sound of small dreams and long nights. The melody grew stronger, painting pictures of everything she had lived through. The laughter, the loneliness, the hope that had kept her going. It wasn't a perfect performance. She missed a few notes, but no one noticed because her heart spoke louder than any mistake. When she finished, the judges sat quietly for a moment before one of them asked, "Where did you learn to play like that?" She hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I just listened," she said softly. The head judge smiled. "You don't just listen," he said. "You feel. That's rare." A few days later, her teacher received the letter. The girl had been accepted. She had won the scholarship. When she read it, she didn't scream or cry, she just sat there, stunned. After all the years of silence, someone had finally said yes to her dream. Her mother hugged her tightly, tears running down her face. "You did it," she whispered. The janitor came by the next day and said proudly, "I told you the world would listen one day." Moving to the city wasn't easy. Everything felt new and fast. She missed home. The quiet evenings, the sound of the old piano, the people who had quietly believed in her. Her new school was full of talented students from rich families. They played with confidence, dressed perfectly, and spoke the language of music fluently. She often felt like she didn't belong. During her first few weeks, she made mistakes. Her hands shook during practice sessions, and some of the other students whispered about her lack of training. She heard them say things like, "She just got lucky," or, "She's not one of us." Those words stung, but they also reminded her of where she came from, a place where laughter had once hurt more than anything. She knew that the only answer she could give was her music, so she worked harder. She practiced before sunrise and stayed after everyone left. Her teacher at the academy noticed her dedication and started guiding her personally. "You have something they don't," he told her one day. "You have a story. Don't lose it trying to sound like everyone else." Those words became her guide. She began to write her own music again, small pieces inspired by her childhood, by the sound of the wind through her town, by the echo of her first piano key. Her teacher arranged for her to perform one of these pieces at a student showcase. When the day came, the hall was full of people, students, professors, and guests. She sat at the piano, her heart racing. Then she closed her eyes and began to play the song she had written for her mother. It was full of warmth and love, with moments of quiet strength. As she played, she thought of the long days her mother had worked, the nights she had practiced alone, and the people who had believed in her when no one else did. The sound grew and filled the room. When she finished, there was silence again. That same silence she had once heard after her first big performance. Then the applause came, strong and genuine. After the show, a woman from a local recording studio approached her teacher. "Who is that girl?" she asked. "She plays like she's telling the story of every heart in the room." That night, the girl received an invitation to record one of her songs for a charity album that raised funds for young musicians. She couldn't believe it. Her teacher smiled and said, "See? The world is starting to hear your voice." She recorded the piece a few weeks later. When it was released, it began spreading online. People from all over started sharing it, calling it the song that feels like hope. She read the comments quietly, one after another. Some said her music reminded them of lost loved ones. Others said it made them feel peace after a long time. It was overwhelming but beautiful. She had dreamed of touching hearts through music, and now it was happening, one listener at a time. Months passed, and she continued studying, learning, and creating. She never forgot where she came from. She would visit her hometown whenever she could, always stopping by the old school auditorium. The piano was still there, old, scratched, and missing a few keys, but it felt like home. She would sit down and play for a while, just like before. One evening, as she played quietly, a group of new students walked in. They stood near the door watching her. When she finished, one of them said softly, "You're the girl from the video, aren't you? The one who played that beautiful song?" She smiled and nodded. "Yes, but this is where it all started." The janitor, now older and slower, appeared from behind the curtain, smiling as he heard her voice. "Still playing that same piano?" he said kindly. She laughed. "I could never leave it behind." That night she played her old songs and the ones that had carried her through lonely nights. The students listened, not with judgment or laughter, but with quiet respect. For the first time, she realized her journey had come full circle. The same piano that once heard her fears now carried her triumphs. The same girl they laughed at was now the one inspiring others to believe in themselves. She didn't know what the future would bring, whether she'd perform on great stages or teach children to play. But she knew one thing for sure. Music had saved her, shaped her, and given her a voice when she had none. And as the sound of her last note filled the empty room, she smiled to herself. The laughter was long gone now. All that was left was the music and the story it told. She had come a long way from the girl who used to walk quietly through the school halls, hiding behind her worn-out shoes and faded backpack. Now she was someone people listened to, someone whose music could move hearts in ways she had only ever imagined. But even with all the recognition and opportunities, she remained humble. She knew the journey had not just been about skill. It had been about courage, patience, and belief in something bigger than herself. The city had opened many doors for her. She had performed in concerts, small and large, with audiences that included people who had never expected a quiet girl from a small town to touch them so deeply. She had met musicians who inspired her and mentors who guided her. But more than anything, she still practiced in that quiet old auditorium back home whenever she could. That piano, with its missing keys and scratched surface, was the place where everything had begun. Her life was now full of music, but it wasn't always easy. There were times when she felt tired, when her fingers ached from long hours of practice, or when self-doubt crept in despite all her achievements. Sometimes she would close her eyes and remember the laughter she had endured, the loneliness of sitting in the corner of the cafeteria, the feeling of being invisible. That memory always brought a quiet determination. Every note she played was a reminder that she had overcome all of that, and she had turned her pain into something beautiful. One evening, she was invited to play at a charity event that brought together people from all over the region. She arrived early and saw many accomplished musicians setting up. She felt a pang of nerves, but quickly remembered her teacher's words. "Your story is your strength. No one can play it for you." She took a deep breath, walked to the grand piano, and sat down. Her hands hovered above the keys, just as they had years ago when she had first started. The moment she played, the hall was silent. Her music carried emotion so pure that it seemed to suspend time. Every note spoke of hope, struggle, courage, and the quiet strength of someone who had refused to give up. People in the audience closed their eyes, letting themselves be carried by the sound. Some held hands, others wiped tears, and a few simply sat still, mesmerized. She wasn't performing for fame or applause. She was telling her story. After the performance, a woman approached her. she said softly. Your music, it feels like it carries the souls of everyone who has ever struggled and hoped. The girl smiled, feeling the words touch something deep inside her. That was always her goal, to let her music speak the things that words could not. Back at her new home in the city, she spent her days practicing, composing, and studying. She was still learning every day, and she embraced it. Sometimes she would sit at the piano for hours just improvising, letting her thoughts flow into sound. Those moments were her favorite. They reminded her of why she had started playing in the first place, not for recognition, but for the feeling that music gave her, the feeling that it could change even a small corner of the world. She had also started helping other students. Many of them came from backgrounds similar to hers, shy and unsure of themselves. She remembered how alone she had felt and how much it had meant when someone believed in her. So she offered guidance, encouragement, and sometimes just a listening ear. Watching them grow gave her joy she had never expected. Music had not only changed her life, it was giving her the chance to change the lives of others. One day, she received an invitation to perform in a special concert organized to honor young artists who had overcome adversity. She thought about all the years of struggle, all the nights spent alone at the piano, and the small victories that had led her here. When she arrived at the concert hall, she saw the audience: families, musicians, reporters, and even some old teachers from her hometown. It felt surreal. When she began to play, the room fell into silence once again. Her fingers moved across the keys with grace and confidence. She wasn't just performing, she was sharing herself. Every note told the story of a girl who had been laughed at, ignored, and underestimated, who had never given up, and who had learned to turn pain into beauty. The music flowed with passion, tenderness, and strength, filling the space with an energy that was impossible to ignore. After she finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood clapping and cheering. Some were crying, some were smiling, but everyone felt touched. She stood up, her heart full, and smiled. For the first time, she realized that she had become the person she had always dreamed of being. Not because of the fame or recognition, but because she had stayed true to herself and her music. The audience was not just clapping for her talent. They were clapping for her story. They were acknowledging the years of dedication, the countless hours of practice, and the courage it had taken to face the world despite the laughter she had endured. That applause was the culmination of everything she had worked for, every moment she had ever felt unseen, every note she had played in the quiet of her school auditorium. That night, after the concert, she walked home slowly, thinking about everything that had happened. She passed by the streets of the city, looking up at the lights and the people bustling around. For a moment, she thought about how far she had come. She remembered the girl who had sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria, who had practiced on a scratched old piano, who had believed in herself even when no one else did. That girl had grown into someone who could touch hearts with her music. When she reached her apartment, she sat at the small keyboard in her room. Even after all the big stages and applause, this was still her favorite place to play. She closed her eyes and let her fingers move freely, creating melodies that no one had heard before. These were the songs of her heart, the quiet songs that had been with her all along. As she played, she thought of the people who had helped her along the way: her mother, who had worked tirelessly to support her; the janitor, who had let her practice in the school auditorium when no one else cared; her teachers who had guided her and believed in her; and the friends she had made who had inspired her to keep going. Each note she played carried a piece of their encouragement and love. In the following months, she continued to perform, study, and compose. Her music reached more people, and invitations came from other cities and even other countries. She had opportunities she had never imagined when she was the girl laughed at in the school halls. But no matter how far she went, she never forgot where she came from. She often returned to her hometown, walking through the familiar streets and visiting the school where it all began. She would sit at the old piano in the auditorium, her fingers brushing over the scratched keys. It didn't sound perfect, but it sounded like home. And in that room, she felt the same sense of peace and joy she had felt all those years ago, when she first pressed a key and discovered her own voice. Every time she played for the new students who came to the school, she told them quietly, "No matter what anyone says, your music is yours. Play it for yourself first. The world will notice when you stay true to it." Her words carried more weight because they came from experience, from a life that had been tested and transformed through the power of music. And slowly, She became more than just a talented pianist. She became a symbol of perseverance, of courage, of the idea that one person's dedication and belief in themselves can change the world around them. She was proof that laughter and doubt do not have the final say, that a single spark of hope can grow into something that touches many hearts. Years later, as she looked back on her journey, she realized that the girl who had once been ignored and laughed at was not truly gone. She was still inside her in every note she played, in every song she composed, in every student she inspired. That little girl had taught her more than anyone else, and about courage, patience, and the quiet power of believing in oneself. She had finally played the music that lived in her heart, the music that carried every struggle, every dream, and every hope. And as she played, she knew that the story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been underestimated, laughed at, or told they couldn't succeed. Her music became their voice too, a voice that said, "You can. You are capable. You are seen." The girl they had once laughed at had grown into a woman who played like 1,000 souls, each note carrying her journey, her heart, and the countless dreams that had refused to be silenced. And in that music she found not only herself, but the power to inspire the world, one note at a time. And so, the music continued, flowing endlessly, filled with courage, hope, and the quiet strength that had started it all. The girl who was once laughed at had become a legend, not for fame but for showing that a true heart, a steady hand, and unwavering belief in oneself can transform the world in ways words could never capture.